Before we begin tonight's story, I want you to take a deep breath, because once you step into the desert, there's no coming back. This isn't just a tale of ghosts. It's a record of what happened in Arizona back in 1880, when every pregnant woman inside a lonely nursing home vanished without a trace. You're about to hear the story of St. Mercy, where the desert itself remembers every scream and every cradle still rocks, waiting for what was taken. So before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because sometimes the desert hears your name. Now, let's begin. I remember that night too, clearly the storm, the silence, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. It was the summer of 1880, and the desert around Ravenhill had not seen rain in 9 months. The air was hot, dry enough to split skin, and that was when the message came. Every woman at St. Mercy Nursing Home had vanished. No blood, no screams, just silence. I rode out before dawn. The wind was rising, and I could feel the sand biting at my face like needles. From the ridge, I could see the building, the old nursing home, glowing pale in the half-light, its lanterns still burning through broken windows. Someone had left them lit. The front door was open. Inside, the floors creaked beneath my boots. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The beds were empty sheets, pulled back neatly, as though every patient had simply stepped away for a moment. But there was no sound, no heartbeat, just the slow rocking of cradles, dozens of them, each one moving as if touched by invisible hands. The food was still warm in the kitchen. A half-filled cup of milk sat beside a blood-stained journal, the ink still wet. I picked it up, the last entry, written by a trembling hand. They came for the unborn under the chapel floor. Sound, thunder in the distance, faint lullaby in the background. That was when I heard it. A lullaby, soft, distant, drifting from somewhere below the chapel. When I reached it, the doors stood open, candles still flickering beside the altar. And there, on the floor, was something strange. The boards had been shifted aside, leaving a narrow gap where cool air breathed upward. The smell was unbearable. Old iron, blood. I lowered my lantern into the darkness, and that was when I saw them faint shapes, lined along the walls. Cradles. Hundreds of them. And for the first time that night, I realized I was not alone. Long pause. Whispering fades in. That was the night the cradles began to move. The next day, I returned to St. Mercy, though fear had taken root in my chest like a living thing. The town dared not enter the building after what had happened. Even the sheriff had disappeared. I told myself I was searching for answers, but I was drawn by something darker, the faint whisper that had haunted my dreams since that night. The hallway stretched endlessly, shadows curling around every corner. I could hear the floorboards groan beneath my boots, each creak echoing like a warning. And then I heard it soft, almost tender, a voice threading through the walls. It whispered my name. I stopped. The air around me felt wrong, alive, watching. I pressed my hand to the plaster. It was warm, pulsing, and when I listened closer, I could hear a faint, sorrowful crying. It wasn't coming from the floorboards, or the ceiling, or the rooms. It was coming from inside the walls themselves. I traced the sound to the maternity ward. The cradles there rocked slowly, though the air was still, and above them words glistened red across the wall, fresh as blood. Under the chapel floor. I could feel it then, the weight of every vanished woman, every stolen life, pressing down. My lantern trembled in my hand as I moved closer. The walls shifted. Not literally, but in perception. They seemed to breathe, to lean toward me, carrying with them a chorus of whispering voices. Help us. Find them. Every instinct told me to flee, but curiosity chained me in place. I pressed my ear against the plaster, and in that moment I understood it was not only voices I was hearing. There were small fingers clawing at the inside of the wall, reaching outward. A cold chill ran through me. The cradle closest to me began rocking violently, banging against the floor like it was alive. And then I saw it. A hand, pale, tiny, pressing faintly through the cracks. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, overlapping now, as if hundreds were speaking at once. And through the chaos, one voice rose clear, calm, terrible in its innocence. You cannot save them, Father. I stumbled back, heart hammering, my lantern swinging wildly. From beneath the floor, a low rumble began. It was subtle at first, a vibration, a heartbeat, the sound of earth itself awakening. The chapel floor cracked. I watched in horror as the boards splintered and the stone beneath shifted. From the opening, a faint light pulsed, not golden, not warm, a sickly pale glow, like a warning. And then I understood. Beneath the chapel, in the darkness, the desert was keeping its promise. The vanished women were there, and what had been taken from them had been waiting. I fled the room, stumbling into the hall. The walls whispered all the way to the door. Help us, help us. When I finally stepped outside, the sun was rising. St. Mercy loomed behind me, silent again, as though nothing had stirred. But I knew better. I had heard the walls breathe. I had heard the cradles move, and I had felt the eyes of the desert on me. I could not stop thinking about what lay beneath St. Mercy, and I knew, even then, that the worst was yet to come. I returned that night, drawn by a mixture of dread and compulsion I could not explain. The desert wind had shifted, carrying a faint humming that seemed to echo from the ruins themselves. I passed the chapel doors, still open from my last visit, and felt the air thicken around me. It pressed against my chest, heavy and damp with the scent of something long buried. That's when I saw her half crawling across the sand outside the main gate, skin blistered by the sun, lips cracked, eyes wild and unblinking. She held something in her hands, a small, twisted cross, darkened with blood. It was Agatha Vale. I had heard of her, one of the nurses who had vanished the night all the mothers disappeared. She was alive and broken in ways I could not have imagined. She did not speak at first. She only turned the cross over and over, as if it were the only thing tethering her to life. When she finally whispered, it was barely audible, "Don't touch the mark." I knelt beside her, shaking, unsure if I should ask questions or run. She spoke then, her voice calm in the way the dead are calm. Wasn't a sickness, it was a calling. The matron said the desert had chosen St. Mercy as its cradle. She told me what happened that night, the night the women vanished, how the matron had gathered them in the chapel, how the floor had been marked with salt and chalk, the air heavy as though it carried the weight of some immense, patient thing. She hummed the lullaby the matron had taught them, soft at first, growing louder in their fear. Then the floor beneath their feet began to move, not like wood or stone, but like flesh breathing, pulsing. Hands clawed up through the cracks, pale and small, grabbing at their ankles, dragging at their gowns. Some screamed, some prayed. The matron smiled. "The desert is my mother now," she said, her eyes rolling back. "They will sleep forever in her embrace." Agatha told me she tried to run, tried to escape the chapel, and the sound of infant cries rising from beneath the floor. She said the desert itself seemed alive, pulling at her, whispering lullabies that twisted into threats. She carried nothing but the cross and the memory of the women she could not save. By dawn, she was gone. I found only her footprints, fading in the sand, leading nowhere. And the cross she had carried lay where the chapel steps met the desert, faintly glowing in the morning light. Even now, I remember the lullaby. Soft, endless, patient. "The desert will cradle its children," Agatha said, "and St. Mercy will never be empty again." I left that place trembling, knowing I had witnessed something that would haunt me every time the wind blew across the desert dunes. I could not leave St. Mercy behind. The image of the cradles, moving on their own, haunted every shadow I crossed. So I returned, months later, seeking answers. The town refused to speak aloud. No one in Ravenhill would go near the place. Even the wind seemed to avoid it, carrying only faint whispers across the dunes. I discovered the matron's past in the town records, dusty ledgers, letters never sent, and a few whispered rumors that still clung to the walls like spider webs. Elspeth Hale had arrived from New York in 1862, a widow with no child, a nurse who buried her grief beneath the desert soil. By the next year, she had built St. Mercy Nursing Home on a patch of land that no one else wanted, a hard, barren place the crows avoided. They said she built it to care for women in need. I learned the truth too late to avoid shivering at it. She had bargained with something older than Ravenhill itself, something that called from the desert beneath the chapel floor. I found her journal under the ruins wrapped in cloth, tucked beneath a broken floorboard in the maternity ward. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the words bled through like an echo. The desert is not dead. It breathes, it remembers, and it listens to grief. I have lost everything, my husband, my child, but the midwife promised me life again. I will give her what desert she wants. She spoke of a figure in the dunes, cloaked in white, wet hands, glinting beneath the moonlight. A woman who called herself the Desert Midwife. She told the matron she could return what the earth had taken, but the price was life. Not gold, not blood, but births. And so the matron began her work. She gathered the mothers, the women society had abandoned, and delivered them to the midwife. The babies were never alive in the way we understand life. They became seeds for the desert, their souls swallowed beneath the chapel floor. She wrote about them lovingly, tenderly, as though arranging them in cradles beneath the earth would grant her salvation. Her final entries were frantic. She lied. The desert lied. They are not my children. They have no souls. I pressed my hand to the floor where she had written, and the stone felt alive beneath my fingers, pulsing, as if the desert itself remembered every birth, every stolen cry. I heard faint humming then, not from my lips, not from the wind, but from the earth beneath. The matron had not died. She had become part of the desert's will, and the midwife was patient, waiting for the next cradle to fill. That night, I fled St. Mercy. I heard her voice again. Soft, insistent, you should not have come back. They were not meant for the living. By dawn, I was on the ridge above Ravenhill, and St. Mercy stood in ruins, silent once more. But the lullabies followed me through the dunes, rising with the wind, and I understood the truth. The desert was alive, and it was hungry. I returned again, though my hands trembled the moment I touched the gate of St. Mercy. The desert had swallowed much of the roof. The wind carried sand through every crack, and the air smelled of iron and decay. I told myself I was looking for answers, but I already knew the truth. Beneath the chapel floor, something waited. The trap door was hidden under the altar, faintly outlined in dust and shadow. I knelt, tracing the edges with my fingers. The wood felt cold, almost wet, and as I lifted it, a hollow chill rose from below. The air smelled of earth, blood, and something older. I lowered my lantern. The tunnel stretched far beyond what I imagined. The walls were lined with symbols, circles with eyes, carved deep and stained dark. And dozens of cradles sat along the edges, small shapes that shifted slightly as if alive. I stepped closer, and the sound of the floor beneath me gave way to something more, a low, steady heartbeat, not my own. The cradles began to rock in unison, slowly at first, then faster, as though responding to some unseen command. From the center of the chamber, a circle of stone pulsed. Inside it, the blood was still wet, red, and dark against the pale stone. And there, in the blood, a tiny footprint appeared, moving as though something had walked across the floor. I realized then that the matron's bargain had not ended. The desert had claimed them all. It did not stop at the dead. It demanded witnesses. It demanded me. And then I saw her. The figure at the far end of the tunnel, tall and thin, veiled in white. Her feet did not touch the ground. Her face was hidden, but her presence carried the weight of centuries. "You found what you were never meant to find," she whispered. I raised my lantern, my hand shaking. The cradles rattled, and every bone inside them seemed to move. The air pressed in, thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. The matron tried to save them. She failed. I kept them, and now you will see. The blood on the floor began to crawl toward the walls, veins of darkness stretching upward into the carved symbols. The cradles floated off the ground, rocking violently, their contents moving, though they were nothing but bones. I ran. Up the steps, through the chapel, out into the desert night. But the sound followed me, lullabies twisting into whispers, the desert singing in tongues older than man. By dawn, all that remained was my lantern at the chapel gate, my badge on the sand, and a single cradle rocking gently in the wind. Inside it, a newborn lay still, eyes open, carved into the wood. She will not stop until every cradle is filled. And I knew, then, that St. Mercy was never empty, and the desert would never forgive. I found her at the edge of the desert, crawling through sand baked by the afternoon sun, her body scorched and blistered, her lips moving in a tremor of whispers I could barely hear. Agatha Vale, the nurse who had vanished the night every pregnant woman disappeared from St. Mercy, was alive though broken beyond imagining. I knelt beside her, my hands shaking. She did not speak at first. She only clutched a small cross, twisted and blackened with dried blood, turning it over and over in her palm. Her eyes were unblinking, wild, and haunted. "Do you know what a cradle is?" she asked. Voice soft, tremulous. "A promise. A place to wait until something breathes." She spoke of the night the matron had gathered, the women in the chapel, of the floor lined with salt and chalk, the air thick with something alive, something patient. She told me the matron had delivered them to the desert, to a thing older than Ravenhill, something she called the desert midwife. "We thought it was holy," Agatha whispered, "but it was a lie. Every child born there became a seed for the desert." Her hands trembled against the cross, and I could see her body still reacting to what had happened beneath the chapel floor. The midwife does not take lightly. She feeds on them. Every birth, every mother becomes part of her. The lullabies are for her, Father. The lullabies are her children calling her home. She trembled, her voice breaking into sobs that slowly merged with a sound I cannot describe, infant cries rising from somewhere inside her, echoing through the desert. "She's waking," she whispered. And I felt the weight of her words press against the night like the hands of the dead. By dawn, she was gone. Her body vanished as if the desert itself had swallowed her, leaving only the cross behind, blackened and pulsing faintly with the memory of the lives it had carried. I buried her as best I could at the edge of town, but the sand refused to stay put. Every night, it rose and filled her grave, breathing, and each morning the cross was gone, carried off by some unseen hand, floating back to St. Mercy or beyond, toward the desert that had claimed her. The lullabies did not end. I could hear them in the wind, in the shifting sand, in the hollow of every abandoned building in Ravenhill. And I understood then that the desert was patient, and it never forgot. St. Mercy was not a home. It was a cradle, and its children would never sleep. The desert waits. It waits with patience older than man, breathing beneath the sand, listening for those who dare to seek its secrets. I returned to St. Mercy, knowing this, yet compelled by some force I could not name. The ruins were silent in the harsh afternoon sun, but I could feel the life that lingered in the cracks, in the shattered boards, in the dry wind. I found the trap door beneath the chapel altar. It had not moved since I last opened it, yet when I lifted it again, the air that rose was different, warmer, heavier, smelling of earth, blood, and salt. The cradles were waiting. But this time, they were not empty. Inside each one was a shape, pale and small, twitching as though the shadows themselves had breathed them into being. I stepped closer. The air hummed, and then I saw her. The desert midwife. She stood at the far end of the tunnel, veiled in white, floating just above the stone floor. Her presence was absolute, older than the dunes, patient and terrible. Her voice reached me before her lips moved, a chorus of whispers layered into one commanding tone. "You carry her blood. The matron's promise. You will bear witness." The cradles began to rock violently, their small shapes turning toward her as if drawn by an invisible force. I tried to move, but my feet refused. Every instinct in me screamed to flee, yet I could not. "The desert takes only what is offered," she said. "Every cradle must be filled, every life accounted for." The floor pulsed beneath my knees. The walls seemed to breathe. The small shapes in the cradles lifted into the air. Featureless faces turned toward me, mouths sewn shut, their bones rattling softly like the wind through dry branches. The midwife raised her hand. The blood on the stone floor crawled toward the walls, filling the carved symbols with veins of dark red. The earth beneath me pulsed like a heartbeat, and I realized the cradles were no longer stationary. They were alive. I fled, climbing the tunnel stairs, bursting into the night. The desert wind slammed against me, carrying faint, overlapping lullabies. When I turned, I saw hundreds of cradles floating above the ruined chapel, rocking in rhythm with some unseen tide. I did not stop running. By dawn, all I carried was the memory, the whispering of the midwife, the lullabies of the stolen mothers, and the knowledge that the desert claimed what it wanted. St. Mercy had birthed its children into the desert, and the desert never forgets. The desert never forgets. Even when the sun rose over Raven Hill, casting long shadows across the dunes, I could feel the weight of St. Mercy pressing in from miles away. The wind carried whispers that belonged to no living person, voices of mothers, daughters, nurses, all calling from the ruins beneath the chapel. I knew then that leaving had never been an option. That night, I returned, drawn by the lullabies that haunted my sleep. The building was worse than I remembered. Walls half collapsed, boards splintered, dust and sand coating every surface. Yet something in the ruins was awake, something that had waited for me. I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots. Every shadow seemed alive. And then I heard them whispers turning to cries, cries to wails, a chorus rising from the very walls. The cradles were there, hundreds of them, rocking gently at first, then violently, as though shaken by invisible hands. I could see the shadows of mothers hovering nearby, pale forms that flickered with each movement of the wind. They were waiting, watching. The altar, broken months ago, began to shift. Stone rose from the floor, carving a circle of symbols I had seen in the tunnels before, glowing faintly with a sickly light. The ground beneath my feet pulsed like a heartbeat. And then I saw her, the matron. She appeared at the center of the chamber, her veil white and soaked in shadows, her eyes dark pools beneath it. She moved silently, guiding the floating cradles as if orchestrating some unholy ritual. "You cannot stop them," she whispered, voice echoing in every corner of the ruins. "They are mine. They are ours. Every mother, every child bound to the desert." The air turned thick, suffocating. I felt my knees buckle as I reached for the cradles, but every step toward them felt like walking through water. The shadows of the mothers reached for me, not to harm, but to plead. "Help us, help us, let us rest." I understood then. The matron had not been the true master. She had been a servant. The desert itself had commanded this ritual, and the midwife had been the will made flesh. A lullaby began again, soft and haunting. The cradles rocked faster, floating higher, forming a circle around the matron. The whispers merged into one voice: return them or join them. The ruins shook, stones cracking, dust falling like rain. I ran for the chapel doors, feeling hands of wind push against me. When I looked back, the mothers' shadows were reaching toward the desert, flowing into the dunes, leaving the cradles behind empty, silent, waiting for the next cycle. I stumbled outside. The desert was still, the night calm once more, but I knew it was only waiting for someone else, for the next life. St. Mercy had awakened, and it would not sleep again. The desert is patient. It waits beneath the ruins of St. Mercy, breathing through the sand, listening for the living. I knew the lullabies would never end. I knew the cradles would not remain still. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for the night they truly awoke. I returned under a moonless sky, the wind carrying a faint hum that rose like a pulse from the earth itself. The chapel doors were gone, reduced to rubble. The floorboards had splintered further, revealing the hidden trapdoor beneath the altar. I opened it, lantern in hand, and the air rose, heavy with the scent of blood, earth, and decay. The cradles were moving, not slowly this time. They danced across the floor as if carried by invisible hands, colliding and rising, twisting into impossible angles. Inside each one, the bones of the vanished women rattled and shifted. Not empty, not dead, alive, in some terrible way, filling the chamber with a sound I can only describe as 1,000 tiny cries. And then I heard her, the matron. No longer human, she hovered at the center, her veil flowing, glowing faintly in the lantern light. Her hands rose, guiding the cradles, orchestrating the chaos. "The desert grows," she whispered, each word heavy with power. "Every cradle awakens in time. Every life becomes part of it. The desert demands its children." I felt the ground tremble beneath me. I staggered, my lantern swinging wildly, casting shadows that twisted and danced across the walls. The cradles formed a circle around her, rocking faster, a lullaby rising from every direction. The sound was unbearable sweet, horrifying. The cry of lost children entwined with the whisper of the desert. I tried to run, but the shadows of the mothers reached for me, holding me in place. "Witness us, bear witness, or join us." One cradle floated toward me, its tiny bones rattling in a rhythm I could feel in my chest. The infant inside lifted its head, featureless and pale, and stared into my eyes. The lullaby rose, louder, filling the chamber, echoing through every corner of the ruins. I fell to my knees. The desert hummed beneath me, alive and hungry. The cradles circled me, the matron at the center, guiding them. And I understood the desert had claimed them all. Every mother, every child, every soul taken beneath St. Mercy's floor. The ritual was endless. The desert would not stop, and neither would the cradles. I fled through the ruins, the lullabies chasing me, carrying the voices of the lost women and their children. By the time I reached the sand, the ruins were silent once more, but I knew it was only waiting for the next visitor, waiting for the next cradle to awaken. The desert does not forgive. It does not forget, and it does not stay confined to the ruins of St. Mercy. By the time I realized the true extent of its hunger, the sands themselves had begun to move, creeping slowly across the outskirts of Ravenhill, red and glistening like blood under the moonlight. I watched from a ridge, my lantern dim, my hands trembling. The wind carried the faintest sound of rocking cradles echoing through the dunes, carrying cries of children I had never known. The earth itself seemed alive, pulsing with each heartbeat of the lost mothers, each sigh of the stolen infants. I returned to St. Mercy, compelled by some force I could not resist. The chapel floor had cracked further, the hidden trap door now wide open. The cradles had multiplied, hundreds, maybe thousands, floating just above the stone, rocking, colliding, moving, as if guided by invisible hands. The walls trembled, echoing with whispers of the lost. "Help us, witness us, bear witness." And there she was, the matron, at the center of it all, veiled, glowing faintly in the lantern light, orchestrating the chaos. "They are mine," she said softly, each word carrying the weight of centuries. "Every cradle must be filled, every life accounted for. The desert grows, and so shall my children." I tried to move, but the sand beneath my boots had become alive. swirling and tugging at my legs like tendrils. The cradles floated toward me, rattling their tiny bones, whispering lullabies that burrowed into my mind. Witness or join. Witness or join. I fell, my lantern rolling from my hands, throwing the chamber into darkness. The whispers rose, multiplied, forming a chorus that filled every corner of the ruins. I could feel the desert in my veins, the cold hunger of it filling me, reminding me that the stolen mothers had become seeds. The desert feeds on them, it grows with them, and I was now part of its witness. When I stumbled outside, the sands had already begun to creep beyond the ruins, moving toward the town, swallowing the rocks and shrubs, leaving only emptiness behind. The lullabies followed me, carried on the wind, mingling with the cries of the living and the dead alike. The desert is patient. It waits, and it always comes. St. Mercy was no longer confined to stone and wood. It had spread its hunger, and I knew, deep in my bones, that no one who entered the desert would ever truly leave. The desert does not simply take, it grows, it breeds, and St. Mercy had become its womb. By the time I realized the extent of its reach, new lives had begun to vanish. Travelers, wanderers, women with children, all swept silently into the sands. And from the dunes came the lullabies, faint at first, then rising like a tide, carried on the wind into Ravenhill and beyond. I could hear them in my dreams, each night, calling me back, pulling me toward the ruins. I returned to the chapel under a sky the color of bone. The cradles were no longer confined to the floor. They floated in the air, forming shapes I could barely comprehend, spirals and circles, moving with impossible precision, guided by unseen hands. Inside each one, a small figure squirmed, featureless, pale, alive in a way that should have been impossible. The air smelled of iron, earth, and death. And then I saw them, the children of the desert. Not babies, not fully formed, but something in between. Shadows of life, tethered to the earth, moving in unison with the wind, eyes opening one by one, staring at me, seeing me. I realized with horror that every lullaby I had heard was them calling to the midwife, teaching her how to grow, teaching the desert how to hunger. The matron stood among them, her veil flowing like water, guiding the cradles as if conducting a symphony. "You see them now," she whispered, voice echoing in the ruins. "The desert's children, every mother, every child, every soul I have delivered. They belong to the desert. And now it is time for you to witness fully." I fell to my knees. The cradles circled me, rocking violently, and the whispers became screams. 1,000 voices layered into one, each calling for release, for attention, for acknowledgement. The desert pulsed beneath my feet, alive, patient, hungry. I understood then that this was not simply a place of death. St. Mercy had become a seedbed. The mothers had been sacrificed to the desert's will. The children born of nothing but shadows and blood were its instruments, sent to reach beyond the ruins, to claim more lives, to spread the hunger. I ran through the ruins, chased by the cries of the lost, the rocking cradles, the whispers, until I stumbled into the desert night. The sands were moving faster now, carrying the shape of St. Mercy outward, expanding its reach. And through it all, the lullabies followed, reminding me, warning me, the desert always grows. I knew then that St. Mercy was not just a place. It was a force. It was patient. It would never stop. And I was now part of its witness. The desert sings, not with wind or rain, not with storm or stone, but with voices of the lost. I can hear them every night, 1,000 soft cries, layered with laughter, with sobs, with whispers that curl around my mind like smoke. St. Mercy has become a chorus, and the desert its instrument. I returned once more, drawn as if by some invisible thread, compelled to witness what no living person should. The ruins were alive. The chapel floor shifted beneath my feet. The walls leaned in, breathing, and the cradles, hundreds, perhaps thousands, floated in the air, circling one another in impossible patterns, rocking violently to a rhythm older than memory. Inside each cradle, the children stirred, featureless, pale, their tiny hands reaching outward, their mouths sewn shut, their eyes opened, black voids that stared into me, seeing every thought, every fear, every sin I had tried to bury. The matron stood at the center, her veil flowing, her presence absolute. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. "The lullabies. Every child sings for the desert. Every mother sings for me. And you are part of it now." The floor beneath me pulsed. The walls trembled. The cradles circled faster, a cyclone of bones and whispers. The voices merged into one, a chorus of unbearable sound, chanting words I cannot repeat without losing myself. I tried to flee, but the air itself resisted. The desert wrapped around me like a living thing, its hunger palpable, suffocating. And then I understood. The lullabies never end. They will follow me, haunt me, until the day I die. Every cradle must be filled, every mother accounted for, every life swallowed into the desert's will. I fell to my knees. The cradles lifted me off the ground, and I felt the whispers crawl into my mind. The midwife, the matron, the children, all one. And the desert, patient and unyielding, stretched endlessly, waiting for more. I screamed, but no sound escaped. I struggled, but my limbs were bound by the unseen hands of the earth. And above me, the lullabies rose, soft, eternal, infinite. St. Mercy is alive. The desert is alive, and the lullabies never end. The desert does not forgive, it does not sleep, and it does not release what it claims. I returned to St. Mercy for the last time, though I knew I was walking toward something I could not survive. The ruins were alive, the wind carried the faintest lullabies, echoing in the bones of the building, in the sand, in my chest. The cradles had multiplied, hundreds, then thousands, floating just above the stone, circling like a storm. The matron stood in the center, her veil glowing, pale as moonlight. The children of the desert reached for me, featureless, silent, their mouths sewn, eyes hollow. "The desert keeps its children," she whispered, voice layered with 1,000 others. "And you are witness. I tried to flee, but the air thickened." The cradles rose higher, forming a circle, spinning faster, the lullabies twisting into screams. The desert beneath St. Mercy pulsed, alive, breathing, claiming more than just the ruins. I fell to my knees, the whispers crawling into my mind. The matron extended her hand, and I saw the souls of every mother, every child, trapped in the cradle's rhythm. The desert was not done. It never will be done. The wind carries voices now, faint but persistent. Long after the ruins are gone, I can hear them in every grain of sand, every hollow, every shadow. St. Mercy is no longer a building. It is the desert itself. The cradles drift beyond Ravenhill, carried by the dunes, spreading the whispers to the towns beyond. I follow the echoes, drawn like a moth to flame. Everywhere I go, I hear the lullabies soft, endless, inescapable. The children of the desert call to one another, their hollow eyes searching for more. I glimpse the matron occasionally, floating in the wind, guiding the cradles, smiling. The midwife's presence is in every grain of sand. The desert is patient. It remembers. It waits. And I know now that St. Mercy's horrors are not confined to one place. They are carried in the desert, growing, spreading, waiting for the next life to claim. The desert is eternal. It does not die. It does not forgive. It waits beneath the sun-scorched sand, beneath the ruins, beneath every heartbeat of the living. I have seen the cradles rise, hundreds, thousands, a storm of bones and whispers. I have seen the children of the desert stretch beyond St. Mercy, searching for mothers to claim. I have felt the matron's eyes on me, guiding, watching, smiling. And I know the truth. I am now part of it, a witness, a recorder, bound to the lullabies, bound to the desert, bound to St. Mercy. The wind carries their voices even now, soft, endless, patient. Every cradle must be filled, every life accounted for, and the desert always remembers. The desert will not forget. If you can still hear the lullaby, then the desert has already found you. St. Mercy's ruins may be gone, but her whispers never fade. The cradles still rock beneath the sand, and the matron still counts every soul that listens to her story. If you made it this far, you've already seen what the desert keeps hidden. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether you heard the voices between the words. And if you dare to return, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and be ready, because the desert doesn't forget its witnesses.